I'm delighted to welcome our sponsors panel, and this is titled as the Meet the Sponsor session. We okay there now? Great. So, and I think you've met many of them already yesterday. Perhaps not so much yourself, Nathan, in terms of the conversations and discussions, but a lot of the discussion about there were a lot of case studies yesterday. There was a lot of discussion about some of the tools and the services that collectively our panel here provides into the sector. So really, I suppose what we've got is from our four sponsors, and introduce in one moment, is really kind of moving from the digitization, or that first step in digital transformation, if I may use that term again, into the world where we're transforming our analog still and moving into the world of the digital space, where we're actually beginning to really see and reap the benefits of the digital tools, AI, etc. So I'm very pleased to welcome. I'm going to start here with I'm actually not going to start in order with you, because I'd like to go from the order of perhaps the digitization into the future as well. So I'm staring at Bob with his hat on there. So Bob Berger, whom you all met yesterday, any of you that were here, presented us the SAMA system yesterday, and I think he gave us a really good overview of the digitization of the legacy video carriers and the evolution of that, and perhaps we can also learn a little bit more today about maybe how you integrate with the GrayMeta solution as we go forward here today. And then FASTFORWARD gave us a nice intro into how they evolved really into film digitization and where that came from in the broadcast sector, and the need to, I suppose, introduce some kind of means of more speedily, cost-effectively getting at access to film collections that were really very much on shelves up to about 10 years ago or so. I think you're going quite a while now, but it would at least be that. And then we move into the area of Mnemonica, who over on the far right there, and we have Piero Costantini. Again, Piero talked yesterday a lot about the film world and theatrical production world, and really brings a different lens in terms of peer-to-peer preservation, focusing very much on connecting the full content life cycle and making, I suppose, the preservation useful and visible, but also much more easily accessible and useful for the end user and the production companies. And lastly, but not least, Preservica and Nathan, whom you didn't, as I say, hear so much from yesterday, but we did hear a fantastic case study from the National Theatre, how they're using the tools and services of Preservica to really kind of more easily, I think, and also to surface some of the very rich content that they have in the National Theatre, and looking at new ways, really, I suppose, of exploiting that as well. And I'm also hoping that Nathan, having had a chat with them earlier, can give us some interesting perspectives on some of the legislation, just to loop back to Kate's opening keynote yesterday as well, and some of the themes that came up on that, and where AI is going and how it may or may not benefit us in terms of the regulations that we may be seeing coming into the sector over the coming months and this year. So to begin with, I'd like to start with you, Bob, if that's okay, just to kind of throw a question out there at you. If we kind of look back to when the SAMA system was developed, we could be forgiven for thinking that we should all really be there by now. I'm kind of old enough to remember the UNESCO countdown clock, and it kind of stopped quite a while ago. I'd hate to mention the year when we thought we were coming to the end. So obviously we're not there yet. We have a long way to go on bringing the analog world into the digital future. But I'd like to know from yourself what you see now as what are the biggest challenges in terms of the digitization of the video carriers, and from both the broadcast archive sector, the general audiovisual, and maybe even some of the smaller collections, what you're seeing from your perspective, your clients, etc. Let's try a different one.
Yeah. I think the answer to the question is actually simple. I think when we started with SAMA around 2004, 2005, and design of that system, and everything that we said about the preservation of videotape for years was that the videotape itself was at risk, that problems with storage, that sticky shed, that that tapes, no matter how they were stored, were going to degrade. And when we were talking about selling the SAMA system to archives or museums or broadcasters, the thing that we said over and over again was the tapes themselves are at risk of going bad, of becoming useless. And now, feeling very lucky to still be working in this world, preserving audiovisual heritage, the reality is that the cassette tapes that are sitting in the shoebox in your mom's closet that you had when you were a kid, odds are you put them in the tape deck, they're still going to play. And that the issue of degrading tapes, yes, there are collections that were kept in extremely humid, bad places or no effort was placed to take care of those cassettes or those reels. And yes, they do degrade. And yes, there is a problem. But the real problem today is the degradation of not only the equipment, the decks and their spare parts, but also the knowledge and expertise of how to maintain, use those systems. I think of our colleague James Snyder's effort to record interviews with engineers who built and maintained that hardware so that there is a library available for someone who has that playback equipment and needs to maintain it. That knowledge is at risk. The hardware itself is at risk. And recently, one of our colleagues was talking about how in Europe and the United States, lots of archives, both government and cultural as well as commercial, are actually taking serious the enormous effort to digitize that content. And that effort in Europe and the United States is going to use up a lot of that hardware that when it comes time for those regions that are slightly behind in terms of process, in terms of thinking about solving that problem, in terms of financing solving that problem, when they get around to doing that, there's going to be less availability of that hardware globally. So there are efforts underway to try to get the IP and design behind that hardware from Sony and other vendors to at least have a place where that information is stored in a way that could be shareable at some point in the future when we need to, as opposed to 3D scanning a pinch roller and then printing one, but there's much more complicated engineering and parts and electronics that if that IP of how that system was built, regardless of whether the manufacturer ever wants to make more, that's an area where, regardless as vendors, as archivists, we all have to work together to think about and plan for.
That's really interesting. So it's really, it's that know-how, and I think that also echoes the presentation we had about the floppy disk as well this morning and the recovery of that in a way. It's different, but it's the same in the sense that that kind of proprietary knowledge that goes when the company goes, when the software changes, when you move on to the next, and we've all experienced that. So that's really, really interesting. I'm just going to throw something similar, but obviously different in the sense that when we talk about film, Tobias, as I said yesterday, you gave us a really good presentation about the evolution of FASTFORWARD, and you've been a number of years now in the sector, so you've worked with lots of different broadcast archives, including ourselves. And I suppose, given what remains to be done, do you see that approach? Does that approach, still deliver? How do you see FASTFORWARD addressing the bigger collection of film that is there? And where do you see the innovation going next, and where are you now in the context of that?
Sorry, thank you, Britt. Well, I think that I think it's important to say, and I think we all know it, and I think when we talk about migration and data, that if we think about the film collections, the vast majority is still analog. So I think that what we're seeing is that our collaborators are digitizing large amounts. Of course, we're lucky that we managed to develop new hardware, so we don't have particularly the same issue. I think film hardware is different than tape hardware in that sense, that some of it is easier. So that's not a problem. But if we see where we think we would like to go and where we hope the market would go, and especially the broadcasters. For us, it's all about creating access and creating value based from the content. And I think we all agree. I'm sure Sama and Bob also thinks that's the purpose. So I think that's the general purpose. But what we would like to work towards is continuing this knowledge sharing, but also building stronger projects inside the organizations. And what we're seeing is that that once you get the right tools, the knives and forks to cut up the elephant, and you bring in all the little bees, things starts happening. And I think that's what we find so exciting, and we look forward to, and we can see now with the projects we've done with you, the new projects we just started with RTVE, where they engage a lot of young people, and the archive become very interesting. The tactile stuff and just the sheer mechanics of doing the transfer is actually quite interesting and motivating, and we're seeing communities established around preserving the knowledge of handling film and digitizing it, but then we're also seeing an acceleration. And I think that of the use case, so the value creation. And I think the most exciting thing for us is, of course, experiencing the organizations, and especially the younger people inside the organizations. We're getting old, but seeing that they understand where they're coming from and the value of this content is super, super interesting.
So I kind of think a shared theme there between both in a way that I'm seeing, and we're also hearing in the sector, is the idea that the skill sets, as Bob mentioned, that know-how, the knowledge about the actual products themselves and being able to recover the IP and being able to perhaps recreate it, but B, really the training and mentoring, and that's something that perhaps maybe we need to think about in the sector a bit more as well as we move forward here, because as I say, if we look at where we stopped the clock for videotape back in the day and magnetic tape, the clock stopped, but we had to keep going, and we found ways, and we've been lucky, a lot of us. But I think in the rest of the world, we clearly, parts of the world that may not be represented here this week, the challenges, particularly environmental challenges, are huge. So I might circle back to that. Going to go over to you, Piero. You are founder and CEO of Mnemonica. Some of us know you, some of us don't know you so well. And I think it might be interesting, you gave a lot of insights yesterday, just to tell us a little bit more about Mnemonica, where it started from, what your vision was for it, and where you see it now in terms of the sector and the benefits it's bringing.
Thank you, good morning. Mnemonica is a small company, it's an Italian company founded 10 years ago at the moment. It's a media asset management on the cloud platform, as simple as that. We have this vision that we try to solve to turn what is a problem now for content producers, that is take care of their data. They invest millions to produce data from on the set, and then they lose control during the production, post-production, and after on the long term. So the idea was simple. We spotted the problem in 2012, let's say, where the production companies were starting accumulating hard drives and LTOs in their basement, and we tried to give them a solution before the cloud was so diffused. And so we were, in the very beginning, we say, okay, but we don't have the right technology yet to implement this kind of stuff. And but during time, the cloud was the growth of the cloud was hyperbolic. So it was the necessary layer, technology layer, was available. And so we decided to try to put together this kind of startup. I dropped my work as a filmmaker, and I started with Mnemonica with a bunch of friends, let's say. We were engaged by the production playground, Italian production playground. So we had the network to start the business in a proper way. And we suddenly, in the very beginning, it was very difficult to explain what we were doing because they were not used to have such a thing. They were using to share rough cuts or dailies or stuff like that. They are used to use pen drives, DVDs, or the best option was Vimeo. And so when we approached it with an enterprise level service, they were looking at us like aliens. You know, what do you have in mind? And so it was very difficult in the very beginning to let these people understand that they had that problem, the famous elephant that we talked yesterday about. So when we approached the market and we won the first resilience, let's say, of the market to adopt solutions like ours, we discovered that there was a huge market for this kind of tools. And all the moms that were born during that period, I speak about 10 years ago, were trying to face the problem to get in the quickest way the content from the camera to the desktop of C-level guys. And we were looking exactly the opposite way. So we were looking to the end of the process, so where the things disappear in the fog of preservation. And so Mnemonica wants to solve at the end the problem of preservation at the beginning of the process. So the idea is to give an affordable solution to content producer to have their own way to preserve the investments that they made every day producing the content. It's kind of crazy because we preserve all the investment. If we buy a picture or some piece of art, we'd like to preserve it. We use safes for clocks and blah, blah, blah. And the content producer don't do the same thing with their content, with their investments. So it's a cultural problem, probably, but it turns to be a money problem at the end. Because if you lose the content, you're not able to make any money on the investments that you made. Okay, so the idea was quite simple. So to give this solution that anybody can use is not the tool that you need to be an engineer to use it. It's very friendly. You can do almost everything from the mobile application. So on the beach, you can do your data management. You can distribute the content towards cinemas, creating KDMs for projection in the real world. And to let them understand that preservation should not be a cost, but an investment and something that you can make money on top of that.
Thanks, Piero. I think what's interesting about that as well is that convincing, because we talked about in the broadcast world as well as production theatrical world. I think particularly in broadcast, we've talked an awful lot for years about trying to get the archiving at the beginning of the life cycle. And, you know, we've gotten closer and closer to it, and we see that now with Brendan's presentation and when you get to that sort of zenith level of it. But that's kind of, it's been the dream we've all been chasing for years, but I think in the film and theatrical world, it comes out much stronger how much harder that is. And certainly with sectors whose natural home is not in the world of preservation or thoughts, but in the world of creation and distribution, and move on to the next thing. It's a really interesting overview on it and approach. And I'm going to move on from there to talk now to Nathan. And again, there's a nice flow here that kind of I think is quite complementary as to where we go next here, because in terms of Preservica, again, as I say, we had a very interesting case study yesterday from the National Theatre. We're not that familiar with you in our sector. We've known your name for years. We've all sometimes sort of thought, a bit of a mystery in some ways. We know the name, Preservica. We get what that means. So maybe, I think I sort of have spoken to you and said, you know, we kind of know you from the glam sector. And you said, well, not really. Yes, but no, we're more than that. So I think, again, I'd love to get an overview for the delegates about Preservica, and also maybe to sort of give us some sort of insights in where there is maybe a confluence, or where the different sectors around digital preservation are coming together, and where Preservica fits into that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having us as part of this event. So I covered some elements of where Preservica sits yesterday. If I just go back to our origins, it helps to just kind of put it into some form of perspective, I think, for people in the room. So we've been around since the early 2000s, actually. We started off as a research project with the UK National Archives. There's a bit of a bun fight within the industry as to who first identified digital preservation as an issue within the various industries. It really comes down to NASA were one of the first in the US. They were very much viewing it from a structured data point of view. So they have huge data warehouses and huge computers for doing all their calculations, and some. It's a very mathematical issue. The UK National Archives in the early 2000s, they've been collecting data, digital content, since the late 80s. And obviously, as a repository and receiving data from all around the UK, there was a huge variety to that. But then fast forward to the early 2000s, and that's when they started to realize that all this data was starting to degrade over time. And there was a general view amongst people, even today, that once it's a piece of digital content, it's just going to last forever. Well, after 10, 20 years, that will naturally degrade over time. And that's either from bit rot, losing the ones and zeros, but also very commonly is due to file format obsolescence. So really anything over 10 years in the digital space needs a dedicated program to help manage that over time. And the reason for 10 years, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's 2 tech refresh cycles. So even your common formats such as PDF is problematic, and that's gone through a number of revisions over time. Probably everyone in the room is very familiar with PDFA. That's a good open archival format, but even that has its own problems. It's easy to look like a PDFA. It's easy to make a PDF look like a PDFA, but without having the underlying fundamentals to help secure it for the long term. So those are the kind of 2 parts where we came from. We developed a number of specific tools with the UK National Archives, including Droid, Pronom. These are still very common in the industry and very open source friendly. This was to help support the wider community. And really from that was born Preservica and the digital preservation world as we see it. We were all talking preservation from slightly different angles, but active digital preservation is where we are very unique. And we've actually just been granted the patent on 3 levels of digital preservation because of being the originators in this space. So that's kind of where we started, where we moved to. Preservica span out as a separate organization. And as you mentioned, very familiar in the GLAM markets, but in reality, we work from the very, very small, tiny archives, the loner rangers, as they call them, around the world, all the way through to the largest government and financial institutions on the planet. All the top UK banks use Preservica, banks in America and Australia as well. So and then, of course, we have people like Dan from the National Theatre. So because our position within the archive community is very broad in a lot of ways, but our approach is very niche and specific. So we cover all unstructured formats. So there's a lot of overlap with digitalization partners and vendors. Even catching up with Rob, we've got shared customers in Yale, for instance, in the US, and we're very big in the university and education space. I think my personal interest in coming to this event, because I've been following all the work which has been going on over the years, been wanting to come to the event. I think something which had always kind of maybe prevented us kind of taking more of an active role in the audiovisual space in particular is the scale of the data on this side, and also the approach to using tape as well. And Rob's point there of, actually tape is a great way of doing this over time. I think Preservica has a lot to offer as in a supporting role, and for organizations where they are making that full step to digital. The scale had always been kind of preventative to us. And actually the work with National Theatre really helped to push our boundaries and push us in that direction. And since that point, we have actually been taking on far more projects which are at the petabyte scale. So we're starting to see that in, for instance, with the library sector in particular. So British Library, New York Public Library, always had on-premise systems. The cost of on-premise storage has gone through the roof now. We're now able to actually help move them to cloud, and as the cost of cloud storage has come down, our ability to deal with scale has increased significantly. We've kind of hit this very good inflection point. So there's a lot that we offer, kind of adjacent to the work which you're probably already doing within this sector. For me personally, it was just come and also not only say how great we are and everything, but also just to learn the nuances of the challenges in this sector and how we could support there as well.
Great, thanks very much, Nathan. We're delighted to have you, and we hope you'll come back many times to us, actually. So we hope you're not going to be a face we see once, but many times over the coming months and years and conferences and everything. We talked a bit about there, I think, just to kind of throw this out to you all, about sort of the different kind of challenges and issues facing your business sectors in terms of, what you're focused on, whether it's the machines, the degradation, whether it's the persuading the cultural side of things as to what needs to be done to actually, why preservation is important and that actually it is part of the business opportunity, or the demonstration of, yes, you can get at your film archives, you can do it a little more quickly, and we can demonstrate the value of that, and use equals value, and then of course into the whole understanding the nuts and bolts of preservation, and when we hear of the finance world and, national governments, I think it's very interesting is that there's definitely, we're coming together in lots of different ways in that area as well. We're seeing that we all have the same issue, we just have different objects and different scale. But if you had to invest in one particular capability, or if you were advising any of your clients in that way, or any of your business, over the next 5 years, what is the one thing from where you see it and where you're looking at that either your clients or yourselves, you need to really look at and invest in terms of skills or capabilities that perhaps is something that's coming on the horizon now? It's not, if that's not too obscure a question for you all. And you can, whoever wants to go first can jump in.
I can give it a go.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of like first in line, Bob and me, in this kind of supply chain, if you kind of see it as that. So for us, of course, we're focused on understanding the needs in the broadcast archives. We used to be responsible for a broadcast archive. So what we're really focusing on is the idea. I think Brendan mentioned that Brecht did an interesting article some years ago about this digital oil, but as we're seeing it, it's not digital. So we advise everyone to start harvesting the assets, kind of, and create structures around that in collaboration with us or others that allow them to surface and secure the assets. So, we try to build, we call it the community approach, and the idea is to democratize digitization and create tools that allows you to be sure you capture everything, every frame, in sync, and all of this, in order for it to live, in perpetuity in other systems. We're not in the systems business. Luckily, there are brilliant other people being there. So for us, it's about getting the content activated. And we would strongly advise, we understand that, we talked a lot about 2025 and all of these fear-mongering strategies. You need to get the funding and stuff. But what we're seeing now is that almost everyone we work with are producing tons of content. And once you start producing and having access to more of this archival footage, it also accelerates the understanding in the organization. So we actually see that because you can involve more people in digitizing it, you can also use more of it. They become internal ambassadors, so they kind of move and help the archive move higher, or, well, I wouldn't say higher in the hierarchy. I remember when I was at DR, the archive was not really the preferred or the most sexy department. But once you start using the content, it becomes much sexier. And what we're also seeing is there's a huge generation shift, which is a bit scary, because a lot of the people working in the broadcasters don't even know there's a film archive. They have no idea what film is. So if you haven't started digitizing your archive, it's like a complete siloed off collection that is just, no one even asked for it because they don't know it's there. So once you start digitizing it, we saw BBC yesterday doing a lot of regional stuff. Luckily, you know, this stuff is super interesting for a lot of young people, a lot of journalists and so forth. We're seeing the same thing in Spain and other places we're working. I know you're also doing wonderful stuff at RTE. And then the film collections all of a sudden becomes part of the mindset. And once it's part of the mindset, you can start to kind of enrich the oil, so to speak.
Okay, so I just kind of come back a little bit, and yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of a cross-section of skills there with film digitization into digital preservation itself. So I'm just wondering, you know, is digital preservation a capability and a thing? We're all talking about it, but does it become a new kind of capability in itself within the archive profession and within, is it something you're expecting to find? I suppose that's kind of where I was getting at, but.
Well, I think, from my perspective, I totally, yeah, I totally agree with you. On a technical level, I think the thing that I think is real, that I think I've learned that's really important, and it's part of our system, and it's part of everybody's system that's involved in the migration of analog to digital preservation, whether it's film or video or audio, is essentially the standardization of the process within an archive, where the attempt, the goal from our perspective is to enable whoever's using our system to have a standard that's set by the archive, by the content owner, that enables the operator or the archivist or the engineer to do exactly the same thing over and over again, and repeatable, and yeah, it's editable or changeable on a case-by-case basis, but the organization agrees this is what we want to do to preserve, this is the standard we want to set, and then enable everybody that's using that system to do that. And I think part of all of our systems, especially historically with ours, is to understand that you do not have to be an electrical engineer to operate that system, and nowadays those electrical engineers are busy doing other things. And one of the most exciting things for me has been watching all these facilities, whether they're archives or broadcasters, realize, and I think I said this, the best operator for our system is a library science graduate student, the best we've ever seen. And do those people exist? Yes. Do I tell our customers, geez, you need operators for this archive system, you should go to the Association of Moving Image Archivists conference in the US or FIAT here, and find, this is a great community for those organizations to find people, because when I go to these different sites, I'm endlessly impressed with the sort of quality of the people who are operating them and their interest in what I or other electrical engineers that have information. I mean, when I was first starting in video as running a duplications facility in 1991, coming from an undergraduate degree in English literature, and having engineers teach me what a horizontal blanking period was and how to detect problems with it, and those guys abusing me horribly, but beating that knowledge into somebody who was interested, who had an undergraduate degree in literature, right? That's how I learned about that stuff. And though that passion and interest is actually preserved along with the archive in a way that in production today, where social media or editing or filmmaking or music video production, all these things, it's really interesting for me to understand that my education began with this very hardcore engineering scope-oriented kind of thing. And those kids today, as I shout at clouds, don't know what black levels are or what white levels are or what carrier signals are or whatever. They're making content that a lot of the engineering that was underneath all of that when I started was very important. Today it's not. And the interaction with the archives and the people that are operating these systems that touch that legacy stuff is giving those people very important techniques and understandings of the engineering underlying all of what we're doing. There's a lot of passion and a lot of people that are excited to work in this space.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you. I think it's, to Tobias's point, I think the archives has kind of, certainly we see it as that the skill set has grown enormously, and the need for digital skills now and digital knowledge and information science really is critical in the archive community. But on the outside, from the production side, Piero, you talked a little bit about, you touched a bit about it yesterday, that, you know, we talked about funding and policies and, you know, when you're making that fantastic production that, you know, you hope it's going to win the Emmy or whatever it is, and then of course you forget to send the preservation file. You think, well, you know, so there's definitely something there around the skill set on that side that perhaps needs to be addressed as a bridge into the archive piece.
Yeah. That's the main concern. The cultural problem I was speaking yesterday. So making the preservation part of the production cycle, that's the key, because it will be almost a no cost for at least for the first time of the preservation, let's say the first 20 years. So it's just that you need to want to preserve the content that you make. And yesterday night I was with Michael McConaughey of BFI, having this pleasant discussion during dinner. The question was, are we preserving content or are we preserving data? And this is, it makes a huge difference because from his perspective as a film archive, data is content. From the producer perspective, content is content. He doesn't care about data. He cares about the, let's say, the cultural heritage or the cultural weight that a production has on its shoulders. So the challenge that I see in front of me as a cloud operator is, what do you want to preserve? So we know that there are plenty of formats out there that could be chosen for this matter, but I think that we should start to shrink a little bit the data we want to preserve. Otherwise, this will not be reliable anymore, because we are producing the curve. Michael told me that they are starting to preserve content creator stuff because it's like taking a picture of the society, the UK society in that moment. So they need to preserve that kind of memory, good or not. So the amount of data that we need, that we are going to preserve, will explode and will grow up and up and up. So I think we should, from a certain perspective, try to shrink a little bit and to try to be effective in what we preserve. So the question, preserving content or preserving data, is the main one. He told me that from his perspective, he needs to preserve the memory. So the more data he has, the best it is for preserving the data. Also because in the future, technology will change. Maybe some formats will become unreadable and blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's from his perspective. But from the private perspective, maybe that is not the way to go. Maybe we can use mezzanine codecs, ProRes, 4K, HDR. I think it's enough as a master for a producer's point of view. And so we don't need to keep all the 8K scans files that nobody will never access anymore unless something will happen, unless we will lose other more manageable files, let's say. So I think we should go both ways. So trying to find a cooperation with the public, and so the scans or maybe the high-res, the CDMs will go there, but all the other stuff can be handled directly from the producers. So the investment per film would be very low, and you will start to preserve in a proper way instead of using, hard drives, LTOs, and post-its.
Thank you very much. I think there's lots you could unpick and walk through in that, from the whole impact of the environment issues, of the amount of data we are preserving. And again, if I kind of throw back in time, I would say selection criteria is something we looked at from the start as audiovisual archivists, because we couldn't keep everything back in the day. We either had to throw it out, or we had to make a selection from what to keep, what we could store, and that was when we were dealing with films and tapes. So I think we're maybe a little bit in that world again, but now it's more complex, and I think that's the challenge with the digital world, that selection piece. Yeah. Something we haven't touched on, and I want to really kind of dive a bit into, is AI. And I know all of you, I'm sure, are deploying it in some way. I might turn to you, Nathan, a little bit, because to circle back to Kate on our keynote at the beginning, she put up the list of all the legislation that was coming down the tracks, and I know you have some insights into this that maybe you could share with us around perhaps the impacts of that, or insights around, not so much the tools, but what how we might benefit from or may have to do things differently around the legislation in terms of archives. We already have challenges, so maybe that we could share with you, but
Sure.
We'd like to hear from you, and you bring your insights into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really interesting to hear from Kate, especially on C2PA.
Yeah.
That's something which we've been tracking and within Preservica, because we see it both from a vendor point of view, as to we're going to be accepting this stuff in, so we need to make sure that the metadata supports that in the right way, and make sure that it's a standard that we can actually adhere to and support. It actually mirrors very closely to EIDAS, which is a European standard, very similar with digital signatures there as well. There's a lot of this happening in the industry, and I mean, the conversation which I mentioned to yourself, I was having a conversation with David Canning, who's the head of digital at the Cabinet Office. Now, he was very aware. They've been using Preservica for a long time, and because we kind of view archiving from the high security point of view. That's our top strategic priority. So they use Preservica to hold Prime Minister papers after they leave office, for instance, and that's decisions around why we've gone to war, why we've invested in certain areas. So there's highly sensitive material there. He was looking at AI as there's a lot that can be done there, and they have a dedicated team within the Cabinet Office to take advantage of it. But my concern that I raised with him was, but it's not actually looking at it's not just, was this made by AI, but what large language model were you using? What version of that model were you using? It changes so quickly. At the moment, AI, it's been designed with a gas pedal, but no brake pedal. And I wish I'd come up with that saying, but actually that was from the co-founder of Anthropic, so Claude. And there are some good actors in the field, and I think OpenAI are trying to be that. But Anthropic are very much the punks of the industry, because they're challenging everything at the moment to try and shake things up. And they are being devil's advocate in almost every conversation, which is really good to see. But the problem being is that there's just a huge conflict of interest. Is that as much as it's to protect, most AI platforms are wanting to protect against destruction or anything like that, but then at the same time, governments, the US very recently, was then using AI platforms to help with targeting systems. And that was against the advice of the AI, the founders of the actual originators. So taking it back to where legislation comes into it, there's a lot of parallels to take from the oil and gas industry. When oil was first being exploited, there were lots of big personalities in that space who were making the decisions, and they had to put in legislation. They had to actually remove the ego from the levels of power and make it much more, much fairer, much more predictable, and much easier to manage over global economies and stuff. And now, obviously, oil is still very much a power play piece. So it's not that it solved everything, but it has to come in a way that actually can be applied and then can be monitored over time and refined in that way. So there's no easy answer here. I personally just, I look at recent examples of social media, and I just, even as a technologist, I don't trust tech companies. There's too many examples where tech companies have not acted in the interests of anyone else apart from their shareholders and their bottom line. So I think my kind of takeaway, I've kind of gone in a few different directions and rambled a bit, but there's so many pockets of people trying to do the right things. Library of Congress, Cabinet Office, audiovisual archivists, there's records managers, there's information managers, knowledge managers, and then you also have people within the industry, within AI, running these AI companies who are trying to do the right things. It's that coming together. It's that combining the voices, which is really important. While people remain siloed or in their own communities, I think that's where it's more fractured. I think the power here comes from bringing these groups, these communities together. It doesn't have to be down to exacting points, but you have to have a clear vision. And I do really like that. Going back to my first point there, the idea of we need to design a brake pedal. One that will actually work means that we can actually grow in a sensible way from here, rather than just chasing the next paycheck, the next dollar on that line.
I think I can't speak for everyone in the room, but I know a lot of us are deploying AI tools very carefully, very slowly within the archives, and I guess we're always a very careful community in that respect anyway, but there is stuff coming at us that we're trying to gather as well, and I suppose that'd be one point I'd go to you on, Piero, and before I sort of throw out the delegates here for any questions I might have for any of you on follow-up, was really, when you're getting those files in, do you know what AI is being used in the creation of any of the material, or are you helping them to, is that something that's worrying you about how the...
Not really.
No?
Not really.
Very good.
We are agnostic, so we don't do any QC on the content that we receive from the producers. It's not our role, let's say. AI affects us, I think, of course, in our processes. We use it a lot for... not really for developing the platform itself, but to speed up a little bit some designing processes, of course. And when we are implementing something related to cybersecurity, to have a 24-hour system that checks everything that is happening around the platform, to put a layer on top of our already military-grade security that we have, as we host at the moment like 6 billion euros in terms of production value in our service. So I think that I must sleep at night, so we need security of a certain level. And the other thing that it worries me about, which is not really related to AI, but they have the same root, I think. It's about the data sovereignty. So as a cloud operator, we rely on hyperscaler at the moment, even if we are now designing the migration towards an European operator because of the things that are happening in the world, and nobody can stay with the closed eyes. And so this is a matter that concerns a lot my clients, because they don't know where the data is, even if it's encrypted at rest and nobody can access that data. They are worried, okay, I cannot touch it, I cannot feel it, and so where is my data? And so probably this is also one thing that should be solved at a certain level, probably in the regulation, or I don't know. It's a problem that everybody must have. Also in our private lives, our lives is 51% digital at the moment. So, and where are my photos? Where are the things that I have in my phone? I don't know. It's really impossible to know it. So I think that getting back to the source, it's the way to go. So I think that along with the concerns that we can have with AI and the slow implementation, it's probably what we should expect in the products. I mean, we cannot at the moment implement it directly in the product because we work with new productions, and Netflix or Amazon Studios don't want that any model would be trained on their content, so we cannot implement directly in that sense. But I think that the work on the database side with AI could let the content owners extract more value from their data. And I'm speaking about probably what we will design, what we will implement is an MCP server, so a tool made for agentic AI that helps you to navigate the platform from a prompt and do actions directly from the prompt. And this will speed up and let understand probably the content owners much more the value of the data they have in their database. Searching through metadata, searching through paradata. That's a new term that I learned today, and we also have paradata actually, but I discovered today. Thank you, Laurent, for this. And let the people interact with that kind of information through a prompt. I think it would be very, very useful to exploit the data, the value of the data that you have stored.
Right. I was going to sort of throw it out to the delegates to maybe just if there's any questions you have for our sponsor panel here that anybody would like to throw at them. Hard questions, preferably. The Leaving Cert is on here, so I'm thinking of them. They're writing their exams at the moment. Anybody want to? Okay. Any more comment? I don't. There's nobody. Any more comments than from the rest of you?
One thing I wanted to say about AI and archives that I think is really relevant. GrayMeta was developing the Curio platform for many years, which was a cloud-hosted ML platform that would allow customers that were storing files in the cloud to apply a variety of ML services to it and extract metadata that you could choose which services you want. And ultimately, we sold that product to Wasabi Storage. What I learned working with that product and working with customers, and I think what's really interesting today, and it's almost as if overnight, the issue is that today, archives such as yourselves can host on your own premise with no connection to the internet, without relying on any service from some other provider of an ML service that's touching your content. You can now design and host your own. And you're responsible for the curation, and you're responsible for accidentally or intentionally putting bias into that system. So there's an interesting responsibility on the part of everyone that can now essentially, use open source tools to do different kinds of image recognition or OCR or speech to text or even facial recognition or all of these services are essentially out there and available for you to develop, to use for yourself and your use case. And I'm sure probably also have various AI help you learn how to program that, how to create that. But there's a big democratizing thing that's happened where when we started, there was no, the customers would say to us, well, we're not going to put our content in the cloud and let these services from work. What if my content's in the Finnish language and I need Finnish speech to text, so I need a Finnish ML service hosted in Finland? What's the how am I going to manage any of that security or any of that control? And now, and what I think is really interesting is that those ML services, ultimately, in my mind, I'm thinking that they're like spell check. Ultimately, they are, we say artificial intelligence, but on some level, they're also just computational detection of things in your content. Right now, there's all sorts of, AQC, automated QC that goes through your files looking to find problems or things of note. Well, if there's a green frame that's detected by an AQC product in your film and it points out a warning, well, maybe that's an error in the encoding, or maybe that's a green laser in the movie. Ultimately, you have to go look at that with your eyes and say, oh, that's not something that's a problem, that's supposed to be there. Same thing with black frames, right? Maybe it's supposed to be dark. You have to look. And understanding your content and understanding how those tools can find and help you solve problems or detect things or save metadata or generate metadata is suddenly democratized in a way where you all can, at one level or another, consider developing bespoke systems to serve your purpose. So it's interesting that it's like you're saying, I don't want to necessarily subject my content to some entity that might not be, who knows where they are or what their morality is or lack thereof. But now the responsibility is also sort of pushed onto a community of people who that's not necessarily our core expertise. And now we have to learn about how do I train a model, how do I build a model, how do I run this on my premise, how do I integrate it into my system. It's an enormous capability, and it's really exciting to see that happening for me, just, for us as a company, but globally, everybody's doing that themselves, and that's really democratizing. The power is available to do that, and I think that's amazing.
Well, I think we'll probably finish on that note, but to kind of sum up, I think we've kind of had a good sort of spread of the timeline of the archive world there, from the legacy and the old and bringing it into the new and the digital transformation piece that's ongoing, and then, of course, where we are in terms of the future. And I think it's true, we are all using AI in some way very carefully, but in a controlled and structured way, to your point, Nathan. I think certainly in the broadcast sector, and I know we have somebody here from our regulator, and that is a big issue with all of us, to make sure that how we go forward with it, that it isn't a kind of a random grab everything, try everything. But there's a lot of good trials going on, but very much in that sort of controlled environment as well.
Yeah, and I think
last word,
I'll keep it short. I just want to really end on a positive note. I think it was a positive panel, but from having been involved in this kind of work since the early 2000s, I'm super excited. I think there's so much stuff being done. There's so much stuff being digitized. Yes, we need to digitize a lot, but we are getting the tools, we're getting the systems, we're getting the standards. And I really, really agree. For me, it's all about the content. And we talk a lot about data and data structure, but what really drives me, and I think what drives this community, is the content. It's the public service content for a large part of it in this federation, and it's being surfaced, and it's being enriched, and it's being used in new and exciting ways, and I think that is so promising, and I think that's so needed. So I just want to say thank you for all the good work you're doing, and it's
thank you, Tobias.
It's really, really nice to be part of it.
Well, I want to say thank you to Bob, to Nathan, and to Piero, and Tobias as well. So round of applause, I think, for that. Thank you.